Welcome back and welcome to lesson 19 in the Houdini Environment Beginner Series. In this lesson, we're going to continue where we left off. We're going to set up some render exports, a few AOVs actually, and then we're going to import our renders back into Houdini Cops into a new CopNet to do a little bit of basic compositing, some tweaking, and then exploring kind of how you can modify your image after it's already been rendered. So if you're very new to this, and if this is your first lesson in the series, I encourage you to hopefully follow along, learn some new stuff, and then definitely jump back to review the rest of this series, because there's lots of cool stuff we've covered. But just to get started, what I'm actually going to do is create a new null, because I want to jump off from all this previous setup, which we have covered in the past, from our new camera to this null. And if you are continuing actually from lesson 18, you will remember that this camera node, I'm going to shake to disconnect it. It was up here. All I've done actually was I shook it again and I moved it down here. That was just for organization. I wanted it lined up with the rest of our camera nodes. But nothing's been changed. So you see if I go down here, I can't actually view it yet because I'm not selecting a node that has this camera included. So I'm going to connect this down to the null. We're going to name this null to our new, say our render and comp. And now if I go to cam, I can set our new camera, and you'll remember this animation is exactly what we had set up in the last one. And then this lighting setup also we can do with the switch node. I'm actually going to use the index 2, so 0 would be this left, 1 would be dusk, and then 2 is this one on the right, which was, I believe, a new one we created in lesson 15. But what I want to now do is I want to set up some render AOVs for my image here, and I want to render out every light into its own image, and then I want to put those images back together. And the main reason I want to do that is because I want to change the color of this blue light, which is this one here being instanced. Whoops, that's going to break my setup. But if I disable this graph branches. And let Houdini think, because I broke that. All right, so I want no cam. Select our new camera. And now I'm going to render Karma XPU. And this light has now disappeared because I'm no longer merging this in. So this light was a setup we had done on instancing the lights in lesson 16. But what I want to be able to do is change the color of this light after my image has been rendered. And then I also want to actually be able to flicker the light. So maybe there's going to be electricity effects we might add later in different lessons. So stay tuned and subscribe if you want to see some cool stuff like that. But I might want to say, all right, this will flicker on and off. Maybe we want to change that, and we want to have the flexibility to make quick changes to that without having to re-render the whole animation sequence, because that would be kind of a hassle if we didn't have to do that. So the way we're going to do that first is we are going to set up a new Karma render settings. We're going to name this our renders, and we are going to set first engine settings to XPU. Camera, we're going to set to our new camera, which is the name of this camera. And now actually if we do this, we select this Karma render settings, what we can do is on this no cam setting, we can select render settings camera, and it'll automatically put us to this camera here, which is great. I'm going to set this to, we'll do 1600. And now it's setting width, computing height from the camera, which is the aspect ratio set on this under view. We want XPU, which is good. You can turn on a denoiser if you'd like. I won't actually, just because sometimes with a denoiser, if you are compositing the images back together, you do get some artifacts. So you could do denoising after you've composited them back together, actually in cops. So no denoiser for me. And then I'm going to change the output picture from hip render hip name to hip render. You'll actually see this. This was the first take of the compositing lesson that I did. So I'm going to leave that there, but you won't have this new render folder. But what we will do is we'll add a $OS. We'll change this to our second render maybe. And then what is going to happen is it's going to save this image from this render settings into the hip directory, so the current directory of our Houdini file, render $OS, so a subfolder based on operator string, which is chroma render settings, so the name of this node. Then it's going to name our file to our second renders, again, name of this node, and then it's going to add a 4-integer padded frame number, so we'll see 0041.exr. And now what we could do is render this, and the way we would do that is with a USD render op, connect it. All we need to do is set our render delegate and drag in our render settings. And now what we can do is render current, or render to disk, excuse me, and then we'll give it a minute. This was a placeholder for setting this up, but you could work out of here or not. So I'm just going to give it a minute or two. Nothing's going to pop up because I'm recording. But if I do, actually, let's go ahead and make our comp net. So we'll say this is our rendering comp. We'll color this, let's do purple. Jump inside here. We'll do file. This is the first take I done on this lesson. So I'm going to go back and our second renders. That's the new one we just made. So you to go up, I'm going to show you our second renders was this one. So jump back into here. Click this icon to pop up this window, our second renders, and there we go. Now this is the 3D view, but to get this in 2D, remember we will go to plus, new pane type, viewers, composite view, and we can select our tone mapping down to aces here. So there we go. Import file. And if you are interested in this, there's a lot of the compositing I've done in the fire lesson on this channel, so definitely check that out, because we do fire rendering. We split out the fire, the embers, the smoke, and the environment actually, and then we do a slap comp back in cops to render that out. So I'm going to do a null. I'm going to name this is out comp, because this is actually going to be used for a ROP image output. So what I can do is I can do a color. So I can do HSV adjust. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you that this incoming source, so this render, I can adjust and modify anything here. So maybe I want to hue shift, increase saturation, and we'll do gamma also. So if I do a gamma, not 2.2, I'll set it to 0.8. And then maybe I could do an exposure or brightness. Bright node, I guess, would work too. Connect that and increase brightness. So now what I've done is I've read my file, modified the hue, modified the gamma, increased the brightness, and now I have this empty null, which I'm going to use to reference in my ROP image output. So I'm going to delete this one, and we'll use this new one. So let's say this is my edited image. And then I want to select the cop I'd like to render. So we're in Copernicus. So a cop is the node here in Copernicus that I would like to select, which in this case is my null. I'm going to drag and drop that here. And instead of rendering it to hip render, I'm going to do hip comp. And we'll do just $OS. And then that's all I need. And I just want the input here, so we should have this working fine. So render to disk, and then I should be able to load this straight in correctly, and I can do a file to load that in. So the way it's going to work is do a $hip /comp, and hopefully here we go. And there we go. So now this is the new render we just made. We just modified this and we actually saved it to disk. If I open this up here, you can see it does create a folder on our computer with the modified image. So I'll leave that there. This is a quick setup for actually compositing it. But now what I want to do is I want to split out the environment light here, this orange-ish tinted one, and then the blue one, and then I want to get the blue to be a separate layer, so I can change the color of that without changing the color of these other lights. And the way we're going to do that is hit U to go up. I'm going to go back to my scene view, select this camera render settings, make sure our render settings camera is selected, and then I'm going to go to AOV render vars. Under the beauty, I'm going to do split per LPE tag. And now what I want to do is I want to add an LPE tag, which is a tag we can add to our lights that lets Houdini split them up as we render. So I'm just going to add an individual tag to each light I would like to split. And the way I do that is select the light I'd like to use, go to Karma, under LPE tag, set or create, and we'll name this to tower light. And then I'm going to go to these other settings here, which are under my lighting setup, so lesson 15. And for this one, I'm going to set this to LPE tag. We'll name this sphere light. Well, this one will also be sphere light because we'll render it under the same tag. So I'm going to copy, Control C, paste, Control V. Now select the Karma Physical Sky, and we will do a LPE tag for Physical Sky. If I can spell Physical Sky. There we go. And now if I go down to my render settings and I have this tag selected, what I can do is File, Save to make sure we're not having any accidental crashes. And then when I render, this little icon, the viewing output, lets me select the tags or the AOVs I like to see. And now I can see each individual light in its own render layer. And now one little thing to note is this technically would not be the most correct way to do this. The better way would be to actually reconstruct a beauty pass from scratch for every individual light, but that is going to be significantly more in-depth than we need for this use case. So for what we're doing, this is a perfectly fine way to work, but if you really want to be super correct, then you might want to do a full beauty reconstruction for every light and then build up your beauty again instead of just using a beauty and modifying that. So one quick note, but this is the fine way to do it. Oops. And this actually lets you apply a cop net to the render view, which is another cool thing we might do in later lessons. So awesome. I'm going to pause this, select this Karma render settings, and I'm going to make sure this is set correctly. And on our USD render op, I'm actually going to re-render the same frame. And then I will give it 1 second and we'll be right back to start putting this back together. Welcome back. That was just a little bit of time, but now we are going to, I'm actually going to double click this again just to be consistent, but we just render this out and then we'll give it a second to wait. But now when we jump back inside our COP network, what we'll be able to do is, first of all, actually switch to composite view up in this top left panel. And again, that's new pane type, viewers, and composite view. And then what we want to do is we want to do another file node, and we want to load in the newly rendered image that we just created, which was render, our second renders, and then right here, frame 41. And now you'll notice when we flag this one, it looks the same as actually what we had before, but the one thing we now have to check is this little section here under the parameters. We want to say add AOVs from file. And if we click that, what that's going to do now is it's going to add these extra channel layers, which are the additional AOVs. So I'm going to hit U. The additional AOVs that we set in our camera render settings, which was the beauty and then split per LPE tag. And then this emission actually, if I do a null, this is here by default because we had, I think, an emissive material on the panels on one of the blocks for the procedural crate we had. So that's why that one was there. But in this case, since it's not in the scene, in the camera view, it's going to be black render. But now we can look at the physical sky, the sphere light, and then the tower light. And what we're going to do now is we're actually going to merge these together back into an original one. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do null. I'm going to rename this to our light AOVs. This is going to be our beauty. Oops. If I can type correctly. The microphone is also in front of my keyboard, so I can't actually see the keys while recording. So I might have to fix that in future videos. But here's our beauty. I'm going to alt drag below, and we're going to add in this one, the physical sky, and we're going to add the sphere light and the tower light with just an add node. So BG, background, sphere light, we'll do foreground, and there we go. Delete this one again. And then I'll actually be right back and we will continue. All right, welcome back. We're going to keep going. We're going to add another add node, but the result of this blend node, or this add, which is blend right here, and we're going to connect this and then add in our tower light to foreground, and there we go. Now, if I do a null here, I can do a switch, which I'll connect this beauty, which is the original one, the C, the beauty layer, which had everything combined. I can put that in the top of the switch. And then in the bottom, I can connect the newly combined one that we just made. And then I can toggle back and forth. And this null was done so I could do a render out similar to how we did here. So we'll say out manually, let's say out lights. We'll do comp lights, why not? So out comp lights. And now this switch, when we select 0 and 1, we can toggle back and forth, between the two ones. And you'll actually notice that they're not exactly the same. And I did mention this before, but technically this workflow of adding together beauty renders is not the correct workflow. We would want to reconstruct a beauty pass using, I hit U to go up, using all these additional ones. So diffuse, a lot of these, and it does get complex to do that. So for the purpose of this lesson, we're going to stick with just merging together these beauty renders. And now if I did a HSV adjust, let's do here. And let's actually modify this a little bit so it's a little bit easier to see. Oops. So this is a little glitch I have when I record. But what I'm going to do is rearrange a few things. So I'm actually going to do a null. And then you're welcome to follow along here, but I'm going to arrange this to be a little bit more organized so I can modify individual lights and see kind of exactly what's going on. So we're going to name this as our, say our renders. And now I'm going to drag these all down. I'm going to add a network box, and I'm going to use this as a separator for here. And now what I want to do is I want to have 3 nulls, and I'll say this is main C, so this is beauty or color. I'm going to drag this on top here to connect that. This is 1. And now what I want to do is add 3 more nulls, and I want to name these based on these lights that are coming in. So we'll name this as physical sky. Let's do a color, why not, for gold. I'm going to cut all these because I'm going to reconstruct this, but I want to have a separate little area where I can do color corrections and exposure corrections to each light in a nice and organized way. So this will be sphere light. And I'll actually do sphere lights, because if you remember, there were 2 lights that had this LPE tag. So now we'll do tower lights. And I'm going to connect here to here. And then I'm going to duplicate these again, cut them, and combine them back. And now, at the end of this network, I'm going to connect these 3 lights together. In the order, whether you blend them on top or not, doesn't really matter, at least for what we're doing. So I'm going to connect them to how they were, and this is the exact same thing we had. But now, I could do this, and if I really wanted to get crazy, I could do this here, and I could say modify, let's say physical sky, and then I could do this again. Oops, I'm going to shake to disconnect. This will be modify sphere lights, and you'll see what's going on in a second. Shake to disconnect. This will be modify tower lights. There we go. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a subnetwork for each of these nulls, which will let me do a little bit of a setup where I can modify these by jumping inside this other network. And it looks like my name is there. So I wanted these up here, which will be a fun thing to just quickly change. And I'm going to do modify tower lights. Now what we have is we have these 3 little subnets, which again were just these network boxes. And this is the same way you could work in any context, actually in Houdini. I could group these. If I do Shift C or click this button up here, it'll put these into a subnet. I'm going to Control Z because I don't want to actually do that. But you could do a subnet for lights. That's a common thing I do a lot. Whoops, I'm going to ignore that one. A subnet for lights, maybe all of these are grouped together. I actually do subnets for materials sometimes, and then sometimes subnets for cameras as well. But for our purpose here, this is a fine thing to do. We're going to select that, jump inside here, and now we can do a maybe HSV, not to RGB, whoops. HSV adjust. This null we don't actually need. I wanted this to name it, but it looks like when I named it, the name didn't, it got collapsed into the subnet, but I wanted to leave it here. So I need to select this output. Okay, whoops. I will be right back after this restart. All right, welcome back. We are here again after our second seg fault. Hopefully this won't happen again, but I usually don't get many seg faults, so maybe it's a recording issue. But for now, we're going to jump inside here. We're actually going to leave this null because I don't know if it's a weird bug in Houdini, but I'm going to continue modifying this, and we're going to just stay to the left side of this null here. And you'll notice as I do this HSV adjust, I can change the color. Maybe we want a moonlight, and I'll do a gamma. Maybe I'll put this to a 0.9. Maybe a bright. And I could select all of these and hit A to arrange them if I want to organize them in a certain way. And then you can do Shift S to change your network styling if you want to have rounded or the straight wires. We're going to do bright. We're going to increase this brightness. And now we're kind of getting some kind of moonlight for this one. So you to go up, and you can see if we just toggle this physical sky, this null here, you can see that within this subnet we have these actual few nodes. But the reason we're doing it inside a subnet is just in case we wanted to go crazy and add lots of extra effects, we can do those in a nice organized way. We can actually do this. We can also alt drag, shake to disconnect. And now this light here, if I really liked the modifications I made and this one, you to go up, I could just connect this, and then that would have all of these nodes work again. And it doesn't really make sense because this light isn't as bright, so I'm going to delete these, but you can also copy and paste subnets to reuse little snippets of your network setup. So here we go. This modifies it to make it blue, adjusts the gamma, and then also the brightness. So I'm going to hit U to go up, and let's see what we could do with this one. So maybe we want to make this one, let's do a red since we did blue here. So I'm going to do a HSV adjust, put it to the left of this null, and then let's do a hue shift. And it looks like we're getting a little bit of green and this. So what I'm actually going to try to do is see if I can remove all the saturation and then recolor. So I think what we can do with this is set then our saturation to, and you might not be able to see it, so I'll bump this up just to show you. But you can see we do get these reds and these greens and a little bit of purples, but I want to set the saturation back down to 0. And then I want to use a bright node, and I want to tint the brightness with a color here. And then if I increase this brightness, we are now getting this input. We are desaturating it entirely. So then I'll show you a gamma so you can see it, because it might be very dim. It's very dim on my screen, so it might be even extra dim on yours. But we'll do that. If I do an HSV, connect this here, and then increase this saturation, you'll see we do have some yellows and some blues. So I just wanted to tint this to one color. So what I'm going to do right now is actually use this HSV to decrease the saturation. We can keep the luminance. And then this bright node, I'll delete this and add it back again. I'm using this bright node and I'm recoloring the brightness. And then if I select my display flag, you can see the effect that that has. And we can mess with tint shift if we wanted to. Which looks like it does the highlights and the darks, but I'm going to leave it with just the tinting brightness. And this one I wanted to do a little bit of a warmer. Not quite red, but let's do like maybe a dark orange, which looks good. And then maybe I'll do another gamma, because maybe I want to brighten this up. And there we go. So now I'm going to hit U to go up, and you can see here this little subnetwork here for modify our sphere lights. We are recoloring this and adding that extra warmth. So we'll see what it looks like when we merge those, and that's what we get. And now let's look at this tower light and see what was coming in here and what it looks like when we add those together. So for this tower light, what I'm going to do is I am going to, I'll color this maybe to a green. Select the display flag here. Increase the saturation, value even, U to go up. And then one more thing, we're not keeping the same intensities here. So technically this image might end up being brighter than the original color. And if we want to do a creative and artistic composite, that's fine for what we need to do. And since we're not matching any specific reference, this is fine to do. So I'm going to do another gamma, and I'm going to try to decrease the brightness of some of these because I want these to be a little dimmer. And for consistency, I'm going to copy paste this and I'll put it inside this subnet here. So then we're working in the same way. So copy, delete, shake to disconnect, and connect it here. So we've got this one, physical sky, our sphere light, and then this green from our tower lights. And those get all merged together into this effect. And now you can see we can adjust individual lights without having to re-render. And what I'll actually do is I'll show you how to animate these. So I'm going to delete this again. So we could have a image sequence, and then we can have these flickered on and off. So if I did want to have this flicker on and off, what I would do is I would modify this add node. So if I had this increase and decrease, you'll see it's adding and increasing itself in brightness and its contribution to the scene. So maybe we want to do some more post effects. So maybe we want to glow. We'll add that here. Maybe higher threshold, not quite as bright. And we'll do a large glow. And you can do this to see if you want to output the glow only. And you might actually want to do an add. We'll take the foreground, this image, and then we'll add this glow on top here. So if you wanted to then contribute or modify the contribution of the glow separately, you could do that as well. Or you could include the glow and just bake it onto this incoming render here. So we'll do one glow here. I'm actually going to do a second one, and we'll do here, and then I'll combine the two. So we'll do source. For this one, maybe let's do a little bit. Do a very big glow. Why not? And then I'm going to add here. This is the base image here. I want to add this glow on top, and then I want a second add to take this new one and then add this glow here. And now I can switch between the composite I did here and this original source image. And this glow looks like it's a little crazy. So now we'll just decrease it a tiny bit more. And this is all up to you on how you'd like to do it. And you could skip, you could use as many glows as you'd like or as few as you'd like. So we'll leave that on, and then the parameter we want to actually animate is this one here. So I'm going to color this red, and then we're actually going to set up a quick render of all of our image sequence. So every single frame here for 120 frames, and then we're going to see the animation, and we're going to modify this to flicker on and off, and then we're going to render that out to disk as a comp image for our finalized render. So you to go up. Now what I want to do is I want to go back to our scene view, and what I'm going to do is set our render to be all, we'll maybe just do 60 frames just to save some time. But the workflow here would be the same for if we did 60, 120, or however many we wanted to do. So I'm now going to zoom out a little bit. We'll go here, select this Karma render settings, go to our render settings camera, and you can see this animation is still here. But I'm going to set our frame range at the bottom to 60. We'll let it think for a second. And then on this USD render op, instead of rendering current frame, I'm going to say render specific frame range, and that will be frame F start to F end, which in this case is 0, set, or actually 1, set down here at the bottom to 60. And if I change this to maybe 80, you'll see this gets updated as well. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to click render to disk, but double check all the settings first. And one important thing to note is this $F4 for the frame number. So ensure that that is saved there correctly. Otherwise, each frame is going to override the previous one. So I'm going to click render to disk, and then I will be back hopefully in a few minutes, but I'll let you know how long it took. All right, welcome back. That was about 25 minutes. I think it was 20, maybe 25 seconds per frame. And then I actually did decrease the path trace samples from 128 down to 64 to speed up the render time just a little bit. But to continue where we just were working, I'm going to jump back inside our CopNet. And what we're actually going to do is we are going to switch back to composite view. So this one up here, but again, new pane type, viewers, composite view. And then what we're going to do, go back into ACES, look at our render, and what we're actually now going to set is instead of this 0041 for our file that we're reading in with our file node, we're going to change it to $F4. And now you can see with this, when we're doing this, it's actually evaluating this expression. And then because we have the same, I'm going to hit you to go up again, because we have the same expression on our Karma render settings for our output. And then when we render that, it renders the frame sequence with those frame numbers. We can now reference those numbers in our file name in this file node. And you can see as we pan through our timeline here at the bottom, we get the image loading in that is correct for the frame that we're on. So we can now go back into the end of our network, so out comp lights, and we can go through and we have this whole setup applied for our animation, which is really cool. And now we can just animate as we would in regular Houdini. So the parameter I wanted to animate was this right here. So let's start our animation. We'll have it maybe start frame 10. Let's set it to 0. Maybe for 12 frames, it's off. I'm going to do a keyframe, so I'm going to alt click here on mask. And what I'll actually do as well is I'm going to open up an animation editor in the bottom. And then here we go. And now what I want to do is I want to have this frame or this light come on in a little bit gradually for maybe 12 frames. So I'm going to take this mask again. I'll put it back up to maybe 0.5. So not all the way up. So now it's slowly turning on. Maybe here at 30, we'll bring it back down to 0. And then maybe we'll have it flicker on and off. So we'll go all the way to 1, keyframe. On frame 40, we'll put it back to maybe 0.2. So we don't want it to go too dim, but we'll just leave it there. Maybe 46. We'll go back to 0.8. And then maybe at 52, we'll do, why not 0.3? And then let's go 60 and bump this all the way back up to 1. Now we've got this little animation here, and you can see this is the intensity of our light, but really what it is, it's just this mask factor on this single add node right here. I can color it green so it matches our coloring we've got going on. And there we go. And we can keyframe anything we want. So if we wanted to maybe have this light also change color, we could do a HSV adjust, put it right after our tower light, or we could put it inside here. But for now, I'll just leave it right here so we can see it. Maybe here it starts out. So let's look at this again. Right now we're starting at 0 and it goes up. So maybe the first thing it'll do is it'll start and it'll go yellow. So let's try that. So right here for HSV adjust on frame 24, which was right here at this peak of this one. And I could even pin here. So now I can see the animation intensity of this one while having this node selected. And that was just this pin I selected. So now what I want to do is I want to set frame 24 and I want to tint this node here, this HSV adjust, which is again on this tower light node or tower light little network branch we created. And I'm going to do a hue shift until it reaches a orange. So 257. And I'll do a keyframe there. And then what I want to have happen is I want to have it turn off right here on frame 30. Keyframe again. And then when it turns back on, I want it to instantly be our green. So what I'm now going to do is on frame 30, I had this keyframe set to this 257, which was this orange we had. And then what I want is on 31, I want it set back to 0. So over the course of one frame, it's going to snap back to the green. And now if we continue, it's going to be green again. So it'll start orange, then it'll dim back out. And then when it turns back on, it's going to be green. And we could even maybe tint this. We'll just do a slight variation there because why not? And now if we wanted to render this out back to disk, what we can do is in our last node here, we're going to do a new ROP image output. And I'm going to say this save new animation. And I'm going to take out comp lights, drag it to comp path. And now what I want to do is I want to change the output file and I want to rename it to, let's see where we saved this one here, which was the first sample, first sample composite we did in this lesson. So I'm going to copy and paste. So Control C and then paste it right there. And now what I want to make sure is everything's correct. I'm just reading through to make sure these are the same ones. And let's actually change this name to light animation comp. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to render a single frame, render current frame just to make sure we're working correctly. So render to disk, and then I'm going to do another file node to read this in. And I can do $hip / comp, and then it was light animation comp. And we are on frame 40, so this was the correct one. Click this, and there we go. And it looks correct. So what I actually want to do is I want to put this in another folder. So I'm going to do a $OS, because I want a subfolder for this one. Because who knows, maybe we'll have 1,000 frames later. Or if you're trying to do something similar, you might have multiple shots. So you could have this $OS be a subfolder for each individual shot. And now I'm going to do render frame range, render to disk. Yeah. Excuse me. We're just going to let this work through. And I'll actually cut and I'll be right back once it's finished. All right, welcome back. That took about 1.5 minutes to export, and we're going to keep going. I'm actually going to show you first that these are on disk. And the way I'm going to do that is I'm going to click this background image button, which is right up here, which is going to open up this image selection. And I'm going to go to comp, light animation comp, and now we have all these images from what we've just rendered out. But what I want to do is to preview this in mplay. I'm not going to open up an mplay window separately. You can if you'd like to, but I'm actually going to re-render this directly to mplay because I think that'll be an easy way just to show you what it looks like when it's animated. So apologies for the double rendering, but now we're able to see this here. If I right click and do color correction, I'm actually going to pause it. Well, I'll hide it because I want to see it all at the same time. So we'll switch it to aces, and then we'll wait for this to be done because I want to watch it all in full real time. So I'll give it 1 second. And there we go. Now if we open this up, whoops. If I can do view here, zoom, and home. Now we'll bring my view back to the center. And here we go. Now we've got a little animation. Which is pretty cool. And now actually it looks like when we changed this slight tint, it did actually run through the hue to a pink So I'll do one quick fix to change that and remove that, which was on, I think it was this one. From here to here, I think it does go all the way through pink, which it does look like it does. So I'm gonna actually just delete the frame 40 because I don't need to make any changes. I'm fine with it staying green. So now I'm going to open up the other mplay, which is what we just had here. And now that I've hit that little red icon to disconnect it from the session, I can actually render again to mplay. And then we will see a new one pop up. And we can compare the two here. So this is the new one. And I have minimized the old one. And I'm going to right click on this new one, select color correction, untone mapped, put it to aces, and then we will wait for it to finish, then we'll watch them together. But this is a quick setup. If you want to blend all the images back together, you can make changes to lights, settings. We could even do crypto mats if we wanted to do extra effects, or if we were doing effect comps for, let's see if I can get these timed up. All right, not perfect, but sort of lined up. This is our final effect. But yeah, we could do tons of different effects for fire, sparks, explosions, and then we can comp those directly in Houdini and then render to disk. So if we even wanted to export this as an animation, as a video, we can do File, Export, FFmpeg. Give it a second to think. And now what we can do is we can just save this directly. We'll do my full video. We're going to bake aces to display view, or bake open color IO display view, excuse me. And now this is just going to save out this image sequence to a actual MP4 file. There we go. And that's not the correct HIP directory I wanted to save to. And the reason for that is mplay doesn't know what HIP file we're actually using. So this is just, I guess, my default hard drive setup for Houdini mplay. So you can manually set that. So if I did File, Export, FFmpeg, I could select my directory here manually. But we're going to leave this for now. That's fine. And then I will end the lesson here, actually, because I think that is, I'm going to hit you to go up and just make sure we cover everything. But I think that's a lot of really what we wanted to do. So back to scene view, Carmax view, and we'll just let it think for a second and then quickly recap what we've set up. All right, this is a different thing. We won't get into that one yet. But there we go. That was just a quick setup for our rendering. I'm actually going to do a composite view. Let's do it on this tab because I want to see them together. Viewers, composite view, and here we go. But now we've got our image. We've got it rendered out. We've got the, not this one selected. I want this end one selected. Out comps light. And we've got this final tweaking we did for actually modifying the images as we were rendering them out and then changing colors, putting them back together, blending intensities, and then we even did some hue color adjustments to recolor our light in compositing. So awesome. That's going to be the end of the lesson. Thank you, and I will see you in the next one.